Welcome back, part 3 of my testimony. If you're new here, I'm Christy, and I'm sharing my story with you in hopes that you can see how God moves through all of our stories. So if you're new and you want to catch up, go back and watch parts 1 and 2. I'm going to go ahead and get started with part 3. Just to recap, in the first part, we saw how God was moving in my life before I was even born. And then in part 2, we saw all of the miracles I got to witness as a child and the amazing time I had growing up as a pastor's kid who was heavily involved in inner city ministry. And now for part 3, you're about to hear how it all came crashing down the day before my 16th birthday. Okay. So in the days leading up to my 16th birthday, there was a lot of high tension in my house. My parents were arguing a lot. They tried to do it away from us, but I was a nosy kid. I heard lots of things that were happening. And the day before my 16th birthday, they told us that we were going to have a family meeting at my youth pastor's house. And we got there. They sat all of us down. My youth pastor was there. I'm pretty sure our pastor was there too. And my dad told us that he was an alcoholic, had been drinking for some time, and that he was moving out so that he could get sober. My parents made it very clear that they were not getting divorced, but that my dad just needed time. My parents needed time apart so that they could both heal. Now, I'm sure all of you know that being a teenager is probably the most dramatic time of your life. You have hormones raging, you have all these thoughts, you don't know which way's up. You're trying to learn about life and the world. And everything I knew about life and the world in that moment came crashing down. I ran out of the house, and I just ran until I collapsed and cried. I honestly didn't know what to think, but I knew that I was having a major crisis of faith because everything I knew about God came crashing down in that moment as well. I looked up to my dad as someone who was as close to God as you can get. And if my dad could fail in that way, what would God do? You see, I didn't know God for myself. It was my father's faith. It was my parents' faith. And I was just along for the ride. And because I didn't have a knowledge of God for myself, I went in a downward spiral. I became really depressed really fast. I was looking for anything that could help me feel better. I knew that there had been times in my life where I had felt God. I had been to conferences, I had been to revival services where I had felt the presence of God. And it came about that my mom was going to one of my favorite churches I've ever been to, which was in Toronto, Canada, and she was going to a conference there. And I really wanted to go. Found out my best friend was going. I was so excited, and she wouldn't take me with her. Looking back now, I realized my mom needed that time to heal. My mom needed that time for herself. But when I was 16, I was only thinking about myself, right? So for me, it was just another letdown that I felt like if I could go there, I could feel God again and something could feel better in my life. But I didn't get to go. I had to stay home with my sisters and my dad, who was freshly sober. So I was very depressed. And it got to the point where I was ready to end it all. I didn't know how I could go on anymore. And I wrote a letter and broke up with my boyfriend, and who's now my husband, by the way. Wrote a letter and broke up with him. I was getting ready to send my best friend a message telling her I had written a letter to my parents, and I was ready to end it. When right before I was ready to do it, I got a phone call. And that phone call was from a man, well, he was a kid then, but he was a kid I had never met before. He was a friend of a friend, and he lived 1,000 miles away from me. He called me on the phone and said, I don't know why, but I strongly feel like God was telling me to call you. Is everything okay? And I broke down because God showed up for me in that moment. In that moment, I knew God still cared about me and that God was real. Because if he could send someone from 1,000 miles away who had never talked to me really before to call me and say, hey, what's going on? God told me to call you. He had to be real. From that moment on, I decided I was going to keep trying. Hamilton is my favorite musical, and there's a line in Hamilton that says, dying is easy, young man, living is harder. Let me tell you, it's true. But every single day I made a decision to keep living, and my teenage years were full of drama, but I'm going to get into that in part 4. I'm running out of time here, but I hope you'll follow along. See you next time.